So today we have with us Madri Kalugala, poet who is very much in the news right as we speak in 2022, joining this creative writing session conducted by the Department of English and Linguistics, University of Sri Jayewardenepura. So we have largely with us a community of writers at Sri Jayewardenepura, and some visitors, some guests that we have invited, largely to hear Madri speak and read. So probably my understanding is Madri might take us through a journey across her latest collection, probably Exulansis, which was published in July 2021. But Madri is also someone who has been in the poetic radar for a while. I think her much widely read blog, A Tree Grows in Me, is now probably almost a decade old. And then she published her first collection of poetry, An Almond Moon and the White Owl, in 2016. Which was, I think, followed by a 5-year poetic silence, only for Exulansis to emerge later last year. So thank you very much, Madri, for joining us. It's a very odd hour for a poetry reading, this bang in the middle of the day. But thank you for making the time and taking time off from other things to join us. So Madri, just to kind of start off, to put people in the in the frame, a little bit about you without taking too much time. Madri, you're also on mute. So a little bit about yourself. How did Madri Kalugala, the poet, emerge? How did that happen?
Thank you, first of all, Vihanga, for having me for this session. I must say, like, before starting, I think it's a great initiative that you guys are doing, because I remember our own university days, we did not exactly have creative writing as part of our syllabus, and that was something I really missed out on. I really wished it would have been there in our syllabuses. So I think it's great that you guys are starting this or have initiated this at Japura. So thank you guys for being here today as well. And in answer to your question, Vihanga, the question of how I became a writer is actually something that I myself am grappling a lot with. But if I were to give like a brief background, I think my initial stages of actually starting with writing began purely because of my parents. So we come from a bit of a writing background, and my mother was the one who first sort of encouraged me to start writing a poem at a very young age. I think, if I remember right, it was either for a teacher's day or in gratitude to some teacher, or I have a vague memory of something like that. But I think that was the very first time I actually wrote a poem. And but after writing, I think I sort of realized that I like rhyming words. Like, I like making words match with each other. I like how the sounds sort of interact and how they sort of create like these little nuances and build up little words on their own. So that's how I think I sort of got into rhyming poetry. You guys would have to excuse me for a second. Like, there is a crow here. I have a crow who regularly comes in and demands food from me at odd hours. So usually it's the morning and the evening, and he's here at the moment, so I hope he doesn't disturb us too much. But as I was saying, yes, so the writing journey pretty much started out like that. And then again, my parents encouraged me to write regularly towards, you know, like the typical things that people do when they're starting off, to write towards the, I think it was Junior Observer at the time, and the Funday Times. So I first started out writing little poems for children. So it was all these little imaginary little worlds of unique creatures and things. But I think as time progressed, I started writing less for others, like less for children or for readers. And I think I started more the writing process as an introspective process for myself, because my childhood was quite rough and it was quite uncommon, perhaps, like if I dare say. So there were ups and downs, and I think my way of navigating through those emotions was through the words. So that's how I actually started writing for myself and not for readers or anyone on the outside per se. So if you look at my poetry, like since I was very young, you can gradually see it as my teen years progress, growing more and more morbid and darker and darker. And to the extent that I think one of my literature teachers in school, she actually questioned me like, why do you write such morbid things? And I don't have answers to that. I just write out the emotions as they come. So that's, I think, Vihanga, that's how I got into poetry, into writing. And I would also like to add here that me starting to write in English was purely a matter of circumstances and of chance. Because of my upbringing, because I was brought up overseas and I had to go to an international school. I think it was purely because of that that I started writing in English. If not, I feel that I would have preferred to write in Sinhala, and I might have written in Sinhala. But as circumstances had it, I started off in English, and here I am writing in English to this day. So,
Okay,
yeah.
that's brilliant. So I think something that will resonate with some of the discussion we have had as a group is that important switch where the writing becomes an introspective process. It really takes the writing to a different level, and perhaps it unlocks vistas that you didn't realize existed earlier. And from a point where you first wrote in homage of a teacher to a point where your writing is questioned by a teacher, I think that brings you full circle, I would say, as a writer. So Madri, I would dare say that the publication of your first collection, An Almond Moon and the White Owl, is like a landmark in this poetic journey. Looking back from the advantage of, I don't know, 5-6 years now, what kind of importance would you attach to that publication? How would you look at that publication, looking back purely?
I think when I reflect on An Almond Moon and the White Owl now, Vihanga, I see it in many different layers. When I was publishing it at the time, as you would know, it was actually for the benefit of the others listening, it was actually Vihanga who also got me involved with Paw Print, who published the first book. So at the time the book was being published, I was essentially just putting out a collection of poetry that had collected over the years. So basically, since I was writing since I was around 11 or something, all the way up until I was 25, I believe. So I didn't really know which direction the poems were taking or where the collection was heading. It was just a compilation of work that I had done so far. But now when I look back on it, I seem to see very clearly that there are sort of like conflicting voices. Like, even of myself, like my poetic voice is very conflicted inside the book itself, because I can see the writer that the world expected me to be, or that I was groomed to be, or that people thought I should become, versus the inner voice actually coming out, like struggling to come out. You can see little bits of it raising its voice here and there, and then again sort of being submerged with poetic traditions or what I was supposed to write. But I think Almond Moon and the White Owl was, like I try to say, like a conflicted sort of sort of a product. But I also believe it was where the roots of Exulansis started, like the roots of me breaking out of sort of like the concept of poet or the role of writer that I was supposed to be playing. I think that's where Almond Moon actually places in like the in the greater scheme of things.
No, I think that's a very good observation, because this also brings us to Exulansis, which I think is what we are here to what we are here to hear. But before that, this one point is pertinent in my opinion. How you have seen yourself evolved as a writer since An Almond Moon leading up to Exulansis. Where you see yourself right now in creating reality, in creating versions of you, in communicating? How has that changed? And where has Exulansis taken you?
I would say the greatest thing that has happened is that I can't say that I've discovered my actual like authentic poetic voice yet. Maybe it's still in formation, maybe it's still yet to be developed more or further, but I feel like a lot of the layers shed off, a lot of the maybe the expectations, or like I said, like I was no longer writing for anyone else. Like the journey of Exulansis basically was after I published my first collection in 2016. Uh, it was a very introspective and personal journey that I went through on basically on my own over the next 5 years that ensued. So I think over those 5 years, um, whatever I was feeling, like my emotions and what I was thinking and what was going on inside me took prominence over what I was worried about other people thinking of what I was writing, if that makes any sense. I don't know if I'm being
It
very clear.
does. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so it was a very sort of like an inward journey, and also with Exulansis, I started exploring with like a variety of mediums that I had not really done previously in my poetry before, up until I was 25. Suddenly there was paintings in play, there were like pencil and charcoal sketches, and there was music and song lyrics. So everything was coming together, and all of a sudden the book was not written for anybody. It was just a product by itself. And I think that's where I first came up with the idea, or like I say this sometimes when I talk to people about writing. I feel that um it's not exactly you writing anymore. It's sort of the words writing themselves out through you. And once you shed that expectation or concept of being a writer or trying to be a writer, you just become the medium. And this sort of like the energy and the emotions just take a form of itself, and it sort of like just flows through you. I don't know exactly how else to explain it, but yeah.
Okay, thank you, Madri. So I think, I don't know, history might actually judge us, because while the entire nation kind of is engulfed by darkness, here we are reading poetry. People might actually, the future might judge us as Neros, modern day Neros, fiddling away, right? But let us take that risk and get down to some good poetry. So it's open for you. You have about 10 minutes to hold us at hypnosis.
Thank you, Vihanga. Could you just repeat how much time I have so I could decide how many poems I could read today?
10 to 15, 10 at a minimum,
Okay.
10 to 15.
Okay. Just if I'm going over time or going overboard, just
Sure.
Give me like a heads
Sure.
up or like
Sure.
a sign. Okay. So thank you. So to start off with, I thought the way that I would like to commence this reading is I thought I would like to start from the final piece of An Almond Moon and the White Owl, because it very strongly takes off from there into Exulansis. So I'm going to read the last piece, which is a prose piece. And for those of you who are Sylvia Plath fans or have studied Plath, you might obviously know of her poem Elm. So this prose piece actually starts with like a quote from Elm. So quote, "I am terrified by this dark thing that sleeps inside me. All day I feel its soft, feathery turnings, its malignity." End quote. White Owl. What it feels like is a small bird nestled in the naked white branches of my ribs. Soft and fluffy, so I don't want to kill the unmoving thing, but lodged tightly there at the base of my chest, directly below the heart. It sits there heavy as a balled fist, but covered in white feathers, head tucked neatly in so that I cannot see the intent in the immense yellow eyes. Its claws dig into my intestines, possessive, willing me to surrender to it, my gut. Each of us have invisible creatures buried within us, moving finely in small swells and currents under the taut elastic of our skins. Mine is an owl, and she sits with her hooked beak in my heart and her head turned away so I cannot see her luminous eyes, sucking up the bare minimum of oxygen I need to stay alive. But you see, isn't it terrible? We live and we live and we live, each day passing like water in a flowing stream, never the same in two places, but somehow, strangely, awfully, also the same. As the bus creeps towards its never-ending destination, my eyes zoom in on a city coming slowly to life with late evening lights. Silhouettes of men and women against the yellow glow of brightly lit shops, moving to and fro in liquid black shadow. If they turn their face towards the light, their features move across their faces like water over oval plates of brightness. And the man in his white shirt staring out of the jewelry shop door could be the same as the one behind his little glass cart on the pavement, turning up the fluorescent lamp as darkness falls, so that blue light falls on roasted ratakaju, paper cones of kadala, deep-fried vades. Tomorrow, he will return to this same routine, this little shop, this same day on repeat, and the day after, and the following one, and the next. And time loops around itself in circles like the ripples on a river's surface broken by a stone, and we live each day waiting, searching for a meaning to this existence that we lead. You wake up one morning and find that something within you is extinguished, died out, and your insides feel like carrion, dead meat. You gaze up at a sky and it makes no sense to you that the color you see is supposed to be blue. So this is what it feels like, the breaking down of logic, of everything they ever told you was true. And always there is the white owl. Softly she hoots sometimes, and the sound echoes down the hollow rocks of my stomach like a cave, and she croons into my ear to the dull beat of blood thudding rhythmically. I am alive. Ending with another quote from Sylvia Plath. The elm again. I know the bottom, she says. I know it with my great taproot. It is what you fear. I do not fear it. I have been there. That is the end of the first prose piece. So if I may, I'm now going to move on to Exulansis. This is the second collection. So poem number 2, Disillusionment with Love. Your fingers taste of honey. How? Door stops. A door stopper hits your teeth, closed, clenches your tongue like a wooden peg. Bathroom door. Was it the front door? The gate slams shut. The stopper doesn't work anymore. Can't keep the door from closing. You cannot talk, you say, tongue clenched in a wooden peg. Cannot talk to her anymore. She knows the feeling. When her ribs cracked in the frost, she grafted her lips with 2 pieces curving upwards so she could smile again. And it's hard to talk to you too. Each time a mouth opens, opening wounds, just so you know. On moonlit nights, she bares her chest and tells you, punch me over the heart. I cannot hear it beating, make it start again, make me feel the pain. You aim at the windpipe and she hisses. Honey spills out of her throat, gurgles, gushes out of her ears and spills over your open palms. Over the heart she screams, and her eyes have turned waxen. She is terrified that she is dead. And the moon floods over hollow eye sockets, fills them with bowls of white light. But at the same time, did her smile still remind you of the girl you once loved? Mother, the pain. I loved and I loved and I lost you. Moving on to another piece. This is an excerpt from along the piece. This poem is subtitled, I Take My Body Back. Growing up, my mother always told me I had unbeautiful feet, unfeminine, unslender, too manly, too big for the boots I was supposed to wear. Growing up, I always wondered in silence, what was it all about, the fuss? Were a girl's feet so meant to be small and delicate and pretty? In olden day China, they bound their girls' feet in tight bandages to stunt the growth and keep the white foot petite, so they could fit into tiny silk slippers. Most were crippled for life with malformed toes, but had the prettiest shoes. Cinderella's big-footed sisters, sawing off their heels to squeeze into dainty slippers of glass as fragile as their futures, those of women with large feet. All for a husband, all for a shoe? How quaint. I look down, none the wiser, and my feet touch bare earth and water and stone. Funny. They seem the finest when they are the color of mud, touched slow by grass, bathed soft by rain. Men, too, have kissed them. And for what it's worth, they are like a man's, because like a man's, they were meant to stride in large, bounding steps on this earth. It took me so long to peel you off from my skin, to strip off long vertical layers from forehead to shin, to pick you out from beneath my fingernails, between my teeth. You were everywhere. Oh, you were everywhere. In the lining of my waist, where the love of men was gathering in soft folds, you are growing fat. Yes, I am growing fat, but I am growing fat with love, a weight you shall never put on. So no, I will not watch it. The singing sea inside my ear, where your words still rise like the tide, telling me you wished I had died. And it took years to ease your venom from my veins. I had to draw it out through my mouth, myself with mouthfuls of blood, and then spit it out. The centuries-old poison of women running down women, of men demeaning women, and these bodies which are a no man's land, but at the same time, every man's land. So get your eyes off me. Get your eyes off me. I am taking back my body now. I am taking back my power. Do I have time for another poem, Vihanga?
Maybe one more. Yeah.
So this last poem probably that I'll be reading is called Billowing. Clouds are billowing over me, like petticoats, hung out to dry in a white-laced sky, and they flutter wet against my mouth and beat against my eyes, and I find I cannot shout, for the winds are blowing south. And so many, many petticoats flapping down from the trees, shuddering in the bright hot breeze with a violence I cannot gauge, a murderous, blood-cold rage, swooping for my soul, devouring me whole. Now they are giant birds, a murder of albino crows. They fall all over me, ripped pillows. I am tethered in thick white feathers, as above, so below, and the clouds won't cease to billow. I open my mouth and swallow. The asphyxiation was slow to follow. Thank you.
Thank you, Madri. That was a brilliant presentation at the noon hour on a Friday. Just leads me to a question before I open the floor for others to join in. This is actually taking off from a point you made about where your poetic journey has brought you. Because in Exulansis, we notice the dominating presence of multimedia. I think this is something you drew attention to. So there is painting involved, sketches involved, the painter's imagination coming in. We have a lyricist present. And also parallel to that, you yourself are active in several other artistic spheres. So does this mean that as a creative practitioner, you're moving in a new direction, or what does this give us as suspense, the reader, as we await your creative practice in future?
Before I answer your question, Vihanga, could I just verify that you guys can hear me? Because
Yes,
I'm not
yes.
sure if it's my connection.
You can be here, yeah.
Right, great. So I think Exulansis sort of opened up to me how you can push boundaries in terms of poetry worldwide, but in Sri Lanka, I feel that we are still slow to push the boundaries of what we think poetry actually is, and perhaps I feel like more writers could actually employ like the different media we have, especially in terms of social media, how you can incorporate like images and poetry and maybe art or music and things together in order to present poetry out there to the wider audience. And I also feel that it might help during such a time or age where people talk about how poetry is like a dying art, or how poetry is already dead, which I don't agree with. But this might be a good call for the revival of poetry in itself, to present poetry in a new way. It does not really have to be the standard poetry that we are used to sort of appreciating so far. So in terms of my own work, I feel that now that I've created Exulansis, I feel I can't ever go back to, like, when I take An Almond Moon and the White Owl, and when I look at that book, I'm like, this could have been pushed so much further. Like there was so much more potential. There were so many ways you could interpret this, or like different mediums you could have used, in order to portray these poems. So now that I've produced like Exulansis, I feel that I don't think I'll ever really go back to just the written word on a page. So most probably it will be always trying to incorporate art or perhaps music, or I'm not really sure. I haven't thought that far yet. But definitely, I think I've kind of broken away from the old school poetry that I used to write. I don't know if old school is like the right word to use there. But yes, so not just in terms of poetry. So I have I'm very slowly, but trying to work on some projects, which includes a memoir and also sort of like an illustrated book. I call it a children's book for adults. I don't know how well that's going to come through, but yeah, still in the process. Even in those projects, I feel like I need to push the boundaries more. So I encourage other people as well, like you guys, like especially even the students here, if you are experimenting with your writing and if you're trying to come up with new work, I would encourage you to try pushing the boundaries as much as possible and think out of the box and try to present your work in innovative ways or like different ways. But having said that, Vihanga, I think I should also mention that we have a very perhaps a dying market. I don't know what to call it, but the market for poetry in Sri Lanka is very, as you would know, it's not great at the moment. I hope it hypes up and it gains more exposure. But so the question is, when you produce these sort of mixed media books, the question is finding like publishers and printers who are willing to take up these projects. So that is a challenge. But I think in future we can try pushing things and see how it goes. Yeah.
Thank you, Madri. So I think we will kind of open proceedings for others to join the conversation. Questions you might have, clarifications you would wish to seek from Madri. So you can unmute yourself if you have questions. We'll take a few minutes over that.
This question is directed to Ms. Madri. So whenever like I hear you reciting this poem, I sense that there's like critical discussion of postmodern elements in your poetry. So whenever like we discuss, like we bring out these kind of elements, it's kind of like hard to like convince others to like read and understand what is there. So what is your strategy or like creative technique to make sure that your audience is approaching and getting the clear idea about what you intended by your poems?
Madri, was the question clear? Madri, you're mute, but I think what Mr. Vikramasinghe was driving at was, since your poetry, in essence, it demonstrates a postmodern approach to presenting things, the strategies you use to keep the audience with you, so as not to alienate the audience, to make them go along with your tangibly postmodernist way of presenting things. If I'm not mistaken, Mr. Vikramasinghe, that's the question you had in mind.
Yes, sir. That's
okay.
the question.
Is this in terms of the writing itself, the content, or the way that I present it, like in alternate means?
My understanding
in writing.
Okay, the form, yes.
Okay. So I think in writing, I don't really think of this and employ it as tactics, thinking that I'm going to hook the reader somehow in these means. But I hope it's the imagery, because I do tend to use a lot of sort of like flowing images that keep moving from one to the other, and also rhyme. For some reason, this is also something that I don't really think particularly and do, but when I'm composing a poem, there's a lot of like in rhymes and different, the form sort of falls into place in a very sort of like a rhythmical flowing way, if that makes any sense. So I would say most strongly those are the two elements I feel would keep a reader engaged with the work or the piece that they're reading, is strongly the imagery and yeah, the rhyming systems. But I don't know how do you guys relate to the poems when you're reading it?
Hi, Madri. It was lovely to hear you reading poetry again. I hope I'm audible. Am I audible?
Yeah, you're pretty clear, yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. So when you were talking about pushing the boundaries, where do you think we should draw the limits? like considering the challenges as you mentioned when it comes to the publishing process in Sri Lanka?
I think the biggest challenge is, like I mentioned, like finding publishers who are convinced that poetry is important enough to invest their time and energy and like money in. And I'm not entirely sure where we can draw the boundaries, but I would. This is something that I've not really considered so far, Nalini, but I think if people take up self-publishing, because I've seen a lot of people like do that and publish like versions of ebooks and books online and stuff. If you are creative enough by yourself, I feel that even without a publisher, you could figure out ways to incorporate these new media, particularly social media, and sort of like link things together to create a different sort of experience for your reader. So if you're taking a non-traditional approach and trying to do something by yourself, I feel that you might have more freedom and more like sort of ability to I don't want to say mess around, but try like play around with things. But when it comes to conventional publishers, I'm actually not too sure. Like, I don't know how far. I leave it open to you and to Vihanga as well. If you guys have any ideas of how our publishing sort of is heading, like in Sri Lanka particularly, how do you guys think the publication of poetry is going to head over the next few years or decades?
No, I don't know. Like, if you direct the question to me, this is something we were discussing in our group not too long ago. The path forward for creativity and the way in which circulation and reception can be considered as an integral part of the production process. Because post-production, it depends on what the bookshops want to do with our work and what the critics and the recipients want to do with it. And I think, Madri, you make a very intelligent point, where I think for innovation to be accommodated, for it to have a revamped presence, there is a lot for the individual, especially taking into consideration non-traditional channels. And I think non-traditional channels have a big role in publication moving forward. So I think works like Exulansis has a very important place in bringing out people, making them less inhibited to push back horizons, push back boundaries. So that's my personal reading.
Ms. Madri, understanding that when I listened to your poetry and your prose, understanding that you actually did put out a part of yourself when you were speaking about the creature within all of us, when you were speaking about you were trying to relate to others in the best way that you wanted to. And I think my question is more of like something like Udam's question, but content-wise, like essentially when you give out a part of yourself, and then within like your poetry and your prose, and you see like in the modern world, you really can't dictate as to what the audiences will perceive and judge. You can't tell them, no, that is meant to be this, but that. How would you react to different, completely different interpretations when you present them with an ambiguous imagery?
So I think the only way I can answer that question is, once I have compiled a book, or once the book is published and out there, it ceases to be mine. Like that's the way I go about the work. Once it is out there in the sphere, it belongs entirely to the reader. It's entirely in because I personally, like as a writer, I believe that I have an interpretation of what I am trying to say or what I'm trying to convey to the readers, but whether that message goes through as I intend it to is beyond my control. It might be interpreted like in a completely different manner in which the reader relates to it or understands it, right? So as a writer, I think I have practiced sort of over years the art of letting go of my writing the moment it's out there in the world. So even if people do have different interpretations that are completely different to what I intended, it does not, like, I try not to let it affect me, or because I would rather think of it as a work of art that is out there and it's open to interpretation for anyone as they wish it to be. But I do agree with your point that when you're writing, you have a clear intention of what you believe that you're trying to convey. But I believe that I think it's sort of out of your control how it's interpreted by whoever takes the book into the hands. Does that answer your question? Does it make sense?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, definitely. It answers my question. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Madri, I think we have to close shop at this point. But let me, on behalf of the group we have been leading at Jayewardenepura, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Once again, I have to, at the risk of repeating myself, emphasize it's a very odd hour for poetry reading. But thank you very much for wholeheartedly accepting our invitation and sharing your, not only your entertaining presentation, but also many insights regarding poetry writing and writing in general. So Exulansis is out there. Let's hope it contributes to some of the changes we mutually anticipate in Sri Lankan publication. And let's hope the academics and the critics will be kind to it in the coming years. Thank you very much, Madri.
Thank you, Vihanga. Thank you so much for inviting me, first of all, and for having me for this discussion. And I really hope you guys take up the initiative and go out there and try to make changes. And I'm really proud of you all and of your university and for actually doing this initiative. I don't know, Vihanga, has this been like continuing before? This is the first time I'm aware of like creative writing workshops happening in our university, so I'm not entirely.
I think this course is been happening for a while, a few years at least, in different forms, not in the same form, but in different forms. Yes.
Okay, so great. It's really great to see, and I hope you guys do take up writing and push the limits yourself and see what you can do with it. And good luck with all of your studies and your exams and your futures. So thank you for having me.